And when those cousins were sent over, they were not given permission to read or write. And so for me, it is an act of rebellion almost to be able to write and to be able to read and to be able to have all the education.
Welcome to The Thought Card, a podcast about travel and money, where planning, saving, and creativity leads to affording travel, building wealth, and paying off debt. We are the Financially Savvy Travelers. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Thought Card podcast. Today, we have two very, very special guests. They're both my internet buddies. I've actually met Michelle in real life as well and hope to meet G soon. But we have a lot in common. We are all podcasters. We are all also authors, and we're all have a liking and an interest in the personal finance space as well. So I really wanted to bring us all together to talk primarily about what it's like writing right now during the pandemic, because it's a little bit challenging. Like there's good things, there's bad things, there's good days and bad days, but having this honest conversation, I think, will be helpful for those who are thinking about writing books or those who are writing books right now. So why don't we go around the room and introduce ourselves and what types of books you write? So let's start with G.
Hey, Danielle. So thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate you. I am many things and wear many hats, but I can help you launch a freelance writing business where you get paid anywhere between $100 and $500 to write articles. And you can do that multiple times over and over and actually make that a living. And I also coach women on how to take a book idea from blank page to complete book, as well as with a marketing plan. And I absolutely have a passion for these things. I have a passion for writing.
I run several projects like you all. I wear several different hats. For the purpose of this conversation, I run a personal finance website and podcast called Michelle is Money Hungry, where my goal is to really help people have empathetic conversations about money, but also to monetize what you already know, monetize and sell what you already know, and leverage the internet to do that. And ebooks in particular, and written content similar to what G does is where I'm focused. And I started my interest with ebooks was kind of fostered because I hated low-paying freelance work. And because I was able to leverage the book sales to a certain amount where I was getting really nice income coming in, I stopped freelancing and then was able to go back in almost 8 months later and only pick great clients because I had money coming in from these different revenue streams. So I love leveraging writing as a skill. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about all the things.
Yes. Well, I am super excited. G, I think we're going to get started with you. What inspired you to write a book during the pandemic?
This is a book I had been wanting to write for a really long time, right? And I think that authors and the authors I coach, most of the time when they come to me, it's not because they don't have the ability to write the book. It's not because they don't have the ideas, but because maybe they're in their own heads about it, right? Or they've been using everything else as an excuse as to why they won't write the book. And so when the pandemic hit and we could go nowhere, literally go nowhere, I was like, first of all, life is really short. And then on top of that, like all your excuses to do stuff right now just went out the window. So why don't you just sit down and write? So I had this book that I was already writing. So it's like, this is a good time to finish it. I gave myself a month to finish the book completely. And then another month to edit and then, get the book cover and all that together. And within 2 months, my book, I was able to launch the book. So I had been writing it for a while, but I think when the pandemic happened, a lot of my excuses flew out the window. And also I think that it made a lot of us have rethought a lot of things since this pandemic happened, right? I think there's not a single person on the planet right now that that hasn't rethought everything. So my book is Win at Freelance Writing. It's on Amazon right now. And, I talk about writing and I get questions, well, what's freelance writing? How can I get started? And so I put all of that into a volume so that people could go purchase that on Amazon. That's why I finished writing the book. I had the book idea. I never really sat down to finish, and the pandemic really got a lot of us thinking, right? So, and one of those things was get your book out, girl. So, so that was why I wrote it in the middle of a pandemic.
Very, very inspiring. Now, Michelle, I know that your story is a little bit different because you had quite a few books already in the queue that you were going to release and the pandemic hit. So what do you think has been the hardest part of writing all these books that you already had planned during this time?
Well, it's interesting because I actually was working a very specific strategy. I had already released a few books in January and February, and I'm going to tell you the names of those just to give you context about how things went really left. So for my romance fiction, I decided to write a series of books that take place at an event. That event was the Olympics. The Olympics, the freaking Olympics. The first time since World War II that the freaking Olympics are canceled. I have these books that I was working a specific strategy with, and I was just like, I want to say a bad word, but I'm not going to, okay? However, for my nonfiction books, I had two other ones that I wrote, and again, this is January, February, and the first one I'm going to share, I actually had recorded additional interviews to be embedded into that book to supplement the book. And that book, I need to look at the name of it, is How to Host Your First In-Person Event Without Going Broke or Losing Your Mind. Now, would we want to be hosting in-person events during a pandemic? That answer is no. So that sucked. The funny thing is, I was like, and then I've already attended in-person events. They've just changed. So now I have an opportunity to kind of tweak the content within the book, to add to the book talking about what do these events look like during Corona. And then the last book that I wrote, because of course this is 2020, was Time to Visit Denver. Yeah, we don't want you here. We don't want you here unless you're going to wear a mask. So those were the books that I wrote. So I had this very specific strategy, did all this stuff, and everything went left. And when coronavirus hit and the quarantine orders came down on my mother's birthday, mind you, I was just like, I can't even focus. And then the other thing that was very interesting that happened was my business went crazy busy. So I ended up, I just got really busy with business. I relaunched my course. I did a lot of different things. And I was like, now is not the time for me to write creative works right now. I'm not in the space to do it. I normally get a lot of my ideas when I go hiking or I go ride my bike or I go walk. And when we were quarantined, I live in Denver. I could not go to the mountains, which were 40 miles away, because we were asked to stay in place within 10 miles of our home. And there were people who broke that rule, but there were a lot of people who look like us who were dying, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because if I got sick in a mountain town, they had limited resources, and that wasn't right. So I found that a lot of how I tap into my creativity got affected because I do a lot of physical activity, and that activity triggers my creativity. So one of the things I had to do was just let it go. So now we're recording today. I'm in the mountains, and I'm back into the flow. So I'm up here to literally begin working on my creative works again, because I understand my pacing. During COVID, my business again is still really busy. I keep getting, I don't say no to money. So I keep getting some very lucrative freelance writing projects. That's not my primary revenue stream, but I'm not going to say no to $1 a word projects that are easy for me to do, quite honestly. So now that I'm used to the pacing, I'm able to get back into the flow of writing. And I'm really excited about it because I've literally done nothing with my back stock of books. And it's taken 7 months for me to kind of dwindle to a certain amount of money where I'm like, that's not enough. So now I'm back into it and I'm very excited. And I've even launched a podcast specific to my fiction pen name. But I also leverage my nonfiction books on my other shows. So we were talking about podcasting. I leverage my books very deliberately in very deliberate ways. And I think that's something also to kind of consider if you're thinking about, well, I'm going to write this book and get it out there. Well, how do I market it now?
Yes. Well, you mentioned so many interesting things. And one of the things is about flow, like being in rhythm and being in flow is so important. Also, knowing when it's not a good time to write, like it's not a good time and not necessarily forcing it because the product may or may not be what you intended to be at the end. So I really appreciate that. And I really, really love that. Now, G, I know for your newest book, Win at Freelance Writing, why did you choose the self-publishing route?
If you've ever tried to traditionally publish a book, you have to get an agent, you have to get a publishing house, then they have to, decide whether they want your book or not. And then they take, they may give you advance and ultimately traditional publishing, I think it has its place, to be honest, but it's not, I think it's not always the best for a newer author.
For me, what I find so appealing about self-publishing is it democratizes the ability to share what you want to share. There's no gatekeeper. And one of the things with gatekeepers, and a gatekeeper would be a person who stands between you and the person who makes the final decision. And in a publishing house, that could mean that a secretary could keep you from getting in front of the person, the editor, the person who would look at your work and be like, yes, I want to say yes to this. So you could have like some person who has some preconceived notion just about you as a human, and they could roadblock your ability to get in front of the person who says yes. With self-publishing, what I like is the person you need to get in front of is a reader. I'm going to be blunt. I don't want some old white dude telling me that my paranormal fiction book is not going to be palatable to people when I'm a blurred, Black nerd, and I'm all about Lovecraft country. Like, I am fascinated by how they got that show on TV. Because 5 years ago, there's no way it would have been on TV. No way would Lovecraft country, with the content that show would be on TV 5 years ago. Because there's so many people you have to work through. Self-publishing democratizes our ability to do what we want to do without having to have someone say yes or no to it and sign off.
And, I think that sometimes there is a place for people telling you, well, maybe this type of content may not work for the kind of audience you're going after. It's fine. Like, if people have that opinion, that's them. But the thing is that, what if there is, though?
Yes. And I love that. And to be honest, being able to publish in 2-3 months is not going to be possible if you're doing it with a traditional publisher. So Michelle, can you talk about during the pandemic, how are you thinking about writing your books and also your editing process as well?
So for me, because I write so fast, I'm thinking about what my strategy is. I'm looking at the time of year for the type of books. So for my nonfiction books, for example, I'm looking at the timing of the books. Like when I publish them, is that the right time for them to be published? So the reason why I did Time to Visit Denver at the time that I released it was we were going into the summer. It was winter going into spring, summer. So I felt like there would be enough time for that to kind of get some SEO juice and that kind of thing. I think with creative fiction, it's the same. So for example, with romance, you have Christmas romance and you have Valentine's focused stuff. And you've got, similar to freelance writing or blog writing or any of that, there are certain times of year that you would potentially release a certain type of book. So part of what I look at is I have an idea. When do I need to have that idea out there? In terms of writing, like the actual act of writing, for me, I like to have a certain amount done a week. I do not do daily word goals. That does not work for me because it just doesn't. So some people, they're like, I need to do like 1,000 words. I can easily do 1,000 words a day because I'm a really fast writer. So instead, I have an overall like, okay, I want to get this novella, because mine typically are between 15,000 to 30,000 words, depends on the book. So if I know that my book is 15 to 30,000 words, at this point, I know that takes me for like 22,000 words, 23 hours maybe. So because I know how fast I am, I just give myself a trajectory. As for editing, I self-edit. And I'm 100% fine with that. People buy my books. However, I am considering in 2021 getting an editor because I feel like there are just some things that you miss when you self-edit. I wanted to share that I self-edit, though, because I have the belief that you start where you're at. So part of why I did that in the beginning a couple of years ago was, as you guys know, because we're in the personal finance space, I've been paying off debt. And so when I initially started writing books, that money wasn't being reinvested into my business. That money was paying off bills. And so I had to start where I was at. And I get very frustrated when people tell people that they are wrong to self-edit or whatever because that is not right for them. And I'm like, I want you to start where you're at, and that could be you're at zero. You have no extra money, and do the best you can and learn from it. And then when you get to the point where you can pay other people to assist you with that, then do, because it's always a good idea to have that second set of eyes. But I wouldn't have $12,000 extra if I hadn't self-published and self-edited. So I'm fine with it. And so, yeah. For me, that's my philosophy. I'm not going to poo-poo you for self-editing. However, I've also been blogging and writing for years. And so I'm used to being very critical about my writing and looking at it in that way. So if you're not used to that, be aware that your self-editing might not be that good. And I'm going to share something funny. I have a MacBook Pro, and what they didn't tell me was that sooner or later the keyboard would break. So right now, my keyboard on my MacBook Pro has broken. And so when I was writing my last couple of books, that created problems in the content. So I had to do a lot more edits until I bought the Magic Keyboard. So I actually have to use this in order to type on my Mac. Before I got the Magic Keyboard, that affected my edits because I had a lot more mistakes because the keys weren't working. So be aware of the tools that you're using and how they get the words on paper. So if you're doing like dictation, that kind of thing, you're going to have to be very, very careful about your edits because people will see those mistakes. And I read a lot of books. I read daily. I read self-published books daily. I enjoy them quite a bit. And I do see some of the mistakes. I don't sit there and write bad reviews because of it. So that's the other side too, is as a customer, I've purchased books. I've seen mistakes occasionally. As long as they're not like horrible across the board, people are fine.
And I love that. I think that's refreshing because there is this thing in the author world that you must hire an editor and spend, how many hundreds and maybe thousands of dollars on an editor. So I really appreciate hearing that perspective.
I do kind of daily word goals, but they're not rigid and strict. So I like to do about 1,000 words per day. And just like Michelle, I've been writing for years now. I've had my own blog for 7 years or 8 years now. I've written content for other clients, so I write pretty fast. So writing 1,000 words usually is no problem for me. So usually I set that goal. There are days I'll hit 1,000. Some days I'll go a little bit above that. Some days I'll write 500 words. The point is to write every day for me, and so I do that. And so usually I set those goals. And for my nonfiction books, so I also write both fiction and nonfiction, even though I haven't focused a lot on the fiction side of things. So don't ask me questions. But
I have questions.
Michelle got excited.
Yeah, no, I do some fiction too, but like they're all very emotional stuff anyway, because I'm an emo person. And so so for my nonfiction, usually I think about what would I want people to get out of this book? Like by the time they're done reading, what should they be able to do? So kind of like the before and after, like what are they like before, and after, what do they get? And so I like to think about that and then draft my chapters so that they reflect that, so that it's like taking them on a journey. They start at point A, they end at point Z, and by the time they are done, they have a strategy. Because that's how my mind works, and that's how I like to teach my clients, even within my coaching programs. So I like to go in a linear way that helps them build. Each chapter builds on each other. So I'll draft out the chapters first. Usually I'll draft out the chapters first. Once I draft out the chapters, I know what's going to go in each of them. So then I just fill in the blanks. And that's where I do the daily word counts. And then once I'm done with filling in the blanks with all the chapters, I'm done. And I don't try to fluff it up and make it 50,000 words if it doesn't need to be 50,000 words. I just get to the point and move on. And, I'm a brief and direct person, so I like to be brief and direct. So that's how I keep my books. And then once I'm done, I also do self-edit. So I self-edit, and then I also have people read through my book. So I'll read it myself. Then I'll give it to like my sister or my husband, like folks around, like, hey, read this and tell me what you think. And usually a lot of them will read, like 2 or 3 people at least will read through the book and then tell me, hey, you made this mistake here, you made this there. And then I'll ask them their general impressions. Do they feel like they got value from it? And usually they're able to give me that feedback, right? So once I have that feedback, I know what to rewrite if something is confusing, or what to correct if there were grammatical or spelling mistakes. And then it's off to the book cover designer. I get my book cover, and then I start promoting the book before it even launches. So that's my book writing process.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys for sharing that perspective. I'm a little bit different. I actually have a practice where every morning I sit down and I write before work. So if I wake up at 7:30, I get to write until 9. If I wake up at 8:30, I'm kind of screwed for that day. So that is like the parameters that I create for myself. I also always have like a cup of coffee with me. So I pretty much have it part of like my daily routine, minus the weekends. So I try to just have Monday through Friday, have that before work. And I realized that because that's my most, like my mind is like most creative at the time when I wake up. At the end of the day, I'm not going to get my best work out. And of course, like you're writing this it's your business. So I want to make sure I put myself first in everything that I do, at least for my writing. So that's a little bit about my writing process. And I also have an editor. So I was one of the people who I never learned about commas. I actually have Grammarly do the review for me before I send it to the editor so that she spends less time editing it. I think for me, hiring an editor has helped me improve my writing ability. It gave me structure. Like she was pretty much like guiding me and tutoring me while she was editing. So that has been really helpful. And having the same editor from book to book, she knows me now. And I don't have to explain to her because she already, she has my style down. So I'm a little bit different from you guys, but I loved hearing the strategy and how you guys get it done. Now, Michelle, have you thought about marketing for your books and if the pandemic is changing your marketing strategies at all?
I think that it did, in the sense of it depended on the content of the book. So Time to Visit Denver, clearly it was not Time to Visit Denver. So, but I had an overall strategy that is a long-term plan. And I think that that's where a lot of authors kind of get confused. Like, it should always be a long-term strategy so that you're selling books over time. So Time to Visit Denver, that book should be relevant for years. It's an evergreen product. And so my strategy for marketing reflects that. Likewise, with my romance podcast that I've just launched literally this week. So the first episode dropped on Monday. The goal for that wasn't just to randomly launch a romance podcast. It is top of funnel to sell my books. And it is providing an opportunity for authors in that genre of writing, which is very underrepresented, to share their books. My podcast is also sponsored by my books, as well as my course that I sell. So none of what I do is like, everything's very intentional. And so when you're looking at your books, like if it's a nonfiction book, it's highly likely, hopefully, that it's evergreen in nature. If it's a business book, it should be evergreen for sure. If it's a memoir, that's evergreen. That's your memoir. So when you're looking at, well, an evergreen means if you read it today, it should still be relevant 2 years from now when you read it, right? So that means when you're looking at marketing your book, you're working a long-term strategy. And so everything I do is a long-term strategy. So my new podcast for my romance project, it's brand new, but I've had almost 100,000 downloads on my other shows. So I know what I'm doing, and I know the impact that it has because I've had so many successes with Michelle is Money Hungry, and I've had 2 interviews for CNBC. I should find out when the second one goes live soon, and I've gotten a lot of media because of that. So I understand the impact and power of owning a platform and using it as part of my strategy. And so I think authors would do themselves a huge favor in thinking about, what can I own? And I'm not talking about a website. So like G is a great person to check out because she has her blogs. She's on YouTube and she has this amazing content that she puts out there. And she's also getting people on her email list. So that's the other thing too, is on my romance podcast, my gift to people is a free romance. That's not like an accident. That is a strategy that I'm working, because the bigger my list, the more books I sell. So maybe it takes a while to grow that project, but by this time next year, that's going to be very lucrative for me. So my expectation isn't that I'm going to have this huge success today. It's that what I do now is planting seeds for the next harvest. So it's irrelevant that there's COVID. Actually, it's just things happen. COVID happened and it sucked, but that just means in my evergreen content, I have to add a chapter about COVID, right? So Time to Visit Denver, I have to add content about you have to wear a mask, what to expect, how we expect you to behave when you're here. In my romances, people are wanting inexpensive ways to entertain themselves, right? And so typically, actually, in economic downturns, red lipstick, I think, and romances shoots through the roof. So it's a huge opportunity. And so I think that that's the other thing too, is if you're afraid to sell whatever it is you're trying to sell as a book, don't be afraid, because what you have might really help people right now.
I love the quote, planting seeds for the next harvest. That is amazing. And it really speaks to your strategy and your long-term vision for how books play in your business. So I adore that.
I also loved what Michelle said about having a long-term strategy, because it's not about like the book becoming a one-hit wonder, right? It's about continuously selling this, preferably passively, so you really want to think about those long-term strategy. So one great one was what Michelle mentioned with the email marketing. Another great one is with the content marketing. So that's what Michelle is doing, right? She's starting a romance based podcast specifically for the genre of her book. And it's going to attract those people that are interested in that topic. And ultimately, it's a funnel to her books, right? So content marketing and email marketing are great. I highly recommend it. Another thing that I have found extremely useful is doing podcast tours. And I know Danielle is the queen of podcast touring. I'll be on other people's platforms giving value to their audience, but also in a way, it is a way for me to get more visibility for my brand and my books. And so you really want to think about, how do I get on other people's platforms? And so it may start, for instance, as being a guest on people's podcasts. And sometimes people are worried because they're like, oh, but I'm not going to get on the big, quote unquote, big podcasts. But what I find is that it's not how big the podcast is, it is how focused the podcast is and how engaged that audience is. And when that audience is really highly engaged with the podcast host, then they're going, and whatever your topic is also aligned with that topic, then you're most likely going to attract some of that audience to you. So also, apart from creating your own platform and email marketing, start collaborating with other creators and other people in your space. Don't try to keep I don't know why entrepreneurial types sometimes have this where they think people are going to steal their ideas.
But I've heard it more than once, G, and I've actually heard, unfortunately, a lot of POC express this, that there's this fear, and I wish people would just let it go.
I've been in Facebook communities and stuff like that, and they're like, somebody is stealing my idea. And first of all, no idea is that original, okay? Unless it's a breakthrough. Don't be afraid of, people are going to steal my ideas if I go. I literally had somebody tell me one day she wasn't going to blog because if she blogs, people are going to steal all her ideas. So I whether it's blogging or putting out content, collaborating, please stop having the limited mindset that people are going to steal your ideas. It's a toxic mindset. You need to lose it, because you actually have way more to gain by putting stuff out there than to lose, right? And the people that are going to be your best clients and buy your books, they're going to buy them anyway. So don't worry about it. I've literally been on people's podcasts, and after the podcast, their podcast listeners have gotten in touch with me and said, hey, I want to coach with you. If I didn't go on that podcast, guess what? I would have been out a few $1,000s. So rather think of it in the opposite, that you will be attracting new people, fresh eyes to what you're doing. There are people that are going to fall absolutely in love with you. So get on other people's platforms. That's my biggest new thing, is getting on other people's platforms. I'm also using Amazon ads too recently, and I'm beginning to see that pay off as well. But I am passionate about content marketing and getting on other people's platforms too. Yeah.
I want to say something to kind of piggyback on what G mentioned about the abundance mindset. So all three of us do a variation of the same thing, right? But we cannot serve everybody. I cannot serve everybody. And if I have this idea that I want to take all the business from everybody, one, I'm going to be horrible at what I do. Two, I'm not going to be able to serve all my clients well. And it's just impossible. It makes no sense. And so there's more than enough people out there for all of us to serve. And we're all very different people. So the way that I would approach something is different than what Danielle does, what she does. And I might be like, you know what, I think that Danielle's a better fit for you because the content that you're writing, like you don't have to grasp onto every lead and you don't, because more opportunities should always be flowing.
Always be marketing. And the beautiful thing about what we all just talked about is that if you're doing these things consistently, right, it doesn't matter if somebody steals your idea, if they're actually even going to steal. It's actually much harder than people think anyway. But if somebody actually steals your idea and then goes and launches a program, I mean, you're still, and 100 people buy that program, there are more than 100 people on this planet,
Yes,
who are interested in this topic, and they will find you and they will buy from you. But you obviously have to put yourself out there. So having this crazy idea that writing a blog or posting on Instagram or being on somebody else's podcast is people stealing your ideas is limiting you.
I wanted to add that something that I did during the pandemic is I created a website for my author brand. So I actually had an old website, danielledesir.com, which was kind of like a hot mess, and I kind of let it stay stagnant. And during the pandemic, I really stepped into my desire and my ambition to really take my authorship seriously. So I rebranded that entire website. That was important to me. And secondly, there aren't enough, I don't see enough people of color or women of color who are like talking about writing as a craft. And I'm like, where are we? I want to learn from people who look like me. So creating this platform is not only going to be serving for myself to, market myself and my books, but also to be a platform for other folks as well. So I'm pretty excited about that.
You know what, Danielle, I love that you brought us together today for this podcast, number one. And I love that you talked about the fact that the Black author space is really underserved, and the Black self-published author space is really underserved, and that's why I moved into what I'm doing. And also this also has sentimental value for me, because I'm originally from Ghana in West Africa, and we were colonized by the British. That's why I speak English. And I also know that more than 300 years ago, I had some of my cousins sent over to the Americas, right, to be slaves. And when those cousins were sent over, they were not given permission to read or write. And so for me, it is an act of rebellion almost to be able to write and to be able to read and to be able to have all the education. And I think that, and I am sorry if that's not appropriate for this podcast, but I
got emotional here.
That's powerful. Yeah.
So we have to write. And another thing is that being from West Africa, where whenever I watch television, the stories that are told are those of poverty and desolation, and everything is like Africa is this place where just bad things happen. And oh, thank God you weren't born in Africa, because then you wouldn't have any food to eat. That is the narrative of Africa, right? And one of the things that I'm passionate about is African women and men writing our own stories, to tell the stories from our perspective, because our stories have been told by others for way too long from that perspective, and they can tell it however they want, right? But we can also tell it from our perspective and our experiences, and that can enrich and educate and enlighten the younger generations that, hey, maybe being born on this continent is not such a bad thing after all. There's so much we have to still gain from this, so for me, if you know me personally, then I'm a very straight and narrow kind of person. I follow the rules. I'm very much like that. But when I realized that both Africans and African Americans and indigenous peoples as well were denied the opportunity to be educated and to write and to read for a very long time, me being able to empower others to write their books is an act of rebellion against that.
Gee, I literally wanted to cry a little bit. Like, I felt so emotional hearing that. And this is why I was talking about the gatekeepers. And I got tired of this idea that a person who looks like me can only show up in one way out in the world, in literature, or in nonfiction. Like, there's no other Black person I know who wrote a book called Time to Visit Denver. I haven't seen it. Right. The fact that I have the content that I have coming out about Colorado, because now I'm really focused on that, it's very unique. No, I don't know any other Black person doing it. And it's funny, the kind of response that I'm getting from that content. You would be surprised who will support what you do. And you'll be surprised at, for like fiction, the people who will read your book and say, we're really excited to see this story. So at the beginning of this conversation, I talked about Lovecraft Country. I can't get enough of this show, because it's a horror show, paranormal, like evil and good, and it is so cool. And you know what? It's so cool because I can't even believe that they think Black people can have a story like this. And if I'm writing my own books, if I'm self-publishing my own books, I can imagine all the things. So for me, similar to G, like, this is it's almost a subversive act for romance to write Black women who have a life of love, who experience joy, who are in different types of genres within the romance space, because who are dark, like seriously. So all of my characters typically have my complexion. And I'm like, well, I'm brown, and I want books for like all my ladies to be brown. So all of my romance books, regardless of the trope or genre that I'm writing in, she's always brown. And the reason why is I'm like, there's just not enough books that shows brown ladies.
Brown, yeah.
I'm serious. And it's almost a subversive act to even say that this is an issue.
Because I do want to see, there have been some books, and when I was growing up, there were some books. They were known as the African Writers Series, and those people were African children, but then a lot of books are not like that. And I think, if you meet a typical African, who grew up on the African continent, the narrative is that we're not good enough, right? Because this is the picture that has been painted about us for so long. And that's simply not true. So to be able to present that, I think on wherever people who have been underrepresented or whose stories have been mistold, I think it is important to write them in a way that it does show the different facets of us, right? And I think that's what Michelle is also saying. So I love that.
Last but not least, what is one piece of advice that you would recommend to an aspiring author besides just doing it? Michelle.
I think it's really important to have perspective. Sometimes people will look for feedback from the wrong people about the project. So your family, like my family does not read any of my books. They're not the clientele for my books, okay? My mom already lives in Denver. She does not need to read that book. She does not need to read any of my romance books. Oh my God. And I think just being clear about who the right people are to give feedback and support on your written projects is huge, because if you pick the wrong people, that choice could keep you from moving forward. It could really demoralize you. The number of people who come to me for my course and coaching and what have you, who say, I got this feedback. And I'm like, why were you talking to your mom about this? She doesn't care about androids. Is your mom into this thing? So really be very deliberate about who you share your dream. This in general, who you share your dreams with, your goals, whatever, because not everyone is in alignment with you. Not everyone wants you to win with what you're trying to do. People will project their fears onto you. And with creative works like this, that are very heart-centered, people can break your heart and hurt you with really negative feedback, not because they're mean people, but because you're doing something bold that they're afraid to do. So be careful of who you reach out to on these projects. And it doesn't mean that they don't necessarily want you to win or do well. It just means that you need to be careful about who you connect with on these things.
Excellent advice. G?
Yes. So my piece of advice is not to compare your journey with other authors' journeys. And the reason I say that is that, for instance, what J.K. Rowling is going to define as her level of success may not be your level of success. So define that for yourself. Rather, focus on your journey and focus on getting your book in front of your readers, right? If you consistently do that through a lot of the things that we've talked about today on this podcast, if you consistently market yourself, your books are going to get into the hands of the right people. Those right people are then going to tell other people about you, and that's how your brand is going to grow. But especially in the beginning, don't be out here thinking, well, if I didn't sell 50,000 copies or I didn't sell 100,000 copies, then I'm a failure. No, focus on your journey.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, G, for coming on today. This was literally an incredible conversation. Partly I was selfish because I just want to hang out with more author friends, but there was a lot of great information that was shared, and I hope it inspires folks to really get their work out there. So I would love to hear how folks can connect with you, as well as any writing projects that we should be on the lookout for. So Michelle?
Hey, everybody, please do follow me at michelleismoneyhungry.com. That is also the name of my podcast. So Michelle is Money Hungry. I do have a number of books that are in development and in the works. Just follow me online, follow me on Instagram. Sorry, I just dropped something. On Instagram, it's Michelle is Money Hungry as well, to stay in the loop for those projects. And thank you guys so much for this awesome conversation. I just love what we're doing. You guys are awesome. And I'm just so geeked out right now.
I'll just follow up with mine. So, yes, this has been a fantastic conversation. You can find me. I'm at G Nonterah. So that's GEENONTERAH. I'm at G Nonterah on all platforms, Twitter. And I'm most active on Instagram and YouTube. However, I am on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. So you can connect with me there. Yeah. And I look forward, when you do find me on the interwebs, send me a message and let me know you heard me on this podcast. Okay. All right.
We'd love that. I would absolutely love that. And don't forget, all the links that we mentioned today will be in the show notes and more. So head over to podcast.thoughtcard.com for more information. All right. That is all for now. And I'll talk to you guys again in the next one. Bye.